Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well. Today we are taking a look at gyro controls for Air Sim, specifically for the PS4 and PS5 controllers. I'm super excited to get this one out for you all. I feel like this is going to change Air Sim, kind of make it more accessible, as just about anyone can pick these gyro controls up in probably a few hours of flight time. But what makes gyro particularly interesting for Air Sim is the plane of motion, or the axis, the range of this axis here. If you can imagine, we basically have a full-size joystick right here. So this here is our joystick. So you've got your pitch here, up and down, and obviously you've got your roll as well. And this is huge. It's a huge upgrade to, say, these tiny sticks here. And yeah, it's going to allow for much finer control. You can have the slow and steady control there in the middle, and obviously you can pull it all the way back. So kind of gone are the days where you're forced to lower your multiplier values to prevent spinning and, losing control. So you've actually got full range of motion with this. You don't actually have to lower the multiplier value or anything like that. The range of motion with this gyro here is large enough that you can actually sense kind of how much you're pulling on the stick. So before we get into the video, I just want to point out a lot of what you will see here is still work in progress. I'm still fine-tuning a lot of my binds here, so these may or may not change with time. If you do want to keep updated, I will post screenshots in my Discord group of any changes, and there will almost certainly be an updated video coming at some point in the future when I do finalize these controls. Secondly, I just feel I need to bring up, there is obviously a small initial learning curve with gyro controls, typically 1 to 3 hours on average. I will say, if you can't get it straight away, the best advice I can give is try not to yank on this too fast. You want very smooth, fluid motions, almost minuscule movement. So something that looks like that, really, rather than, doing that type of thing. So you don't want to be yanking up and down. You want nice, smooth, and slow movements. Otherwise, you will just spin out of control and you won't be able to hit a thing. You'll actually get more aim wobble in your pipper. So just try and be nice and smooth with it, and it should work out. Thirdly and finally, as always, I recommend you go into these videos with some prior knowledge. Do not just follow along blindly expecting, ridiculous results. You're not going to necessarily get it straight away, and what works for me will not necessarily work for you. So I recommend you kind of go into these videos, use them as a basis, almost a template, take away some of my ideas and put your own custom bind onto it. And that is generally the way I recommend you look into any of these videos. Alrighty, so before we jump into the controls, there's a few pre-setup steps you're going to want to do. Firstly, if we come up to options, so if we go to menu, this mouse is not very good. Options, and under controller settings, let me just use the controller for this. So under controller settings, just make sure this here is set to yes, align neutral position of motion sensor with gravity, and that's just to ensure your controller is always centered. So make sure that is on. I prefer to set my dead zone to no, so use recommended dead zone is set to no. You can have this on yes or no. Doesn't really make too much of a difference. Depends on your controller, of course. And then, secondly, if we come up here to air battle settings, I like to have my radar enabled at the mission start. And where is the other one? Automatic activation of aircraft weapon selection at mission start. I also like to have that one onto set to yes. And this basically means any rockets or bombs that we have are armed and ready at the mission start. So if we happen to use the secondary weapons bind, we can make use of this here without having to actually switch weapons or enable anything. So it saves binds and all that stuff. Finally, So if we go back into controls here, you want to come up here to options and controls. This is a personal habit, but I like to get into the habit of saving my existing controls just in case anything goes wrong and I need to back them or restore them. So I will go into here, give this a name. So let's just go with what I've been running the last few days. New Gyro Sim 23, which is for the year 2023. And we'll call these 29. Or 0.9 even, sorry. So 2023.9, so 9 revision. And I just like to go with something like that. You can see here I've got a fair bit of history of controls I've saved, let's just say. But yeah, I just like to get in the habit of saving those. And obviously to save it, all you do is type your name, as I've done there, and then you press square to save. And then if you bring this window back up, you've always got that there to actually load back up if you need to do for any reason. And then once we've got that saved, I then like to come down here. So you can press triangle or go directly to control setup wizard. And I will then load up the mouse plus keyboard. Don't worry yet, we are still binding this to a controller. So I'll select that. I will then clear all. And this then gives us a nice clean slate to base all of our controls and future edits on. With the added benefit of, so if we just come up to common here, to bind our pause button, so we can actually unbind the menu button here. And let's just say for example sakes, we want to bind this to statistics. You can actually bind that to statistics. And as far as I know, as far as I'm aware, this is the only way to do this. So you have to be in the mouse and keyboard preset. You have to clear all existing binds. And obviously you want to come down here to the menu, remove that. And you can basically bind this to whatever you want. So you can put it on the multifunction menu. You know, you can do whatever you want with it. And like I said, that's the only way that I'm aware that you can actually bind the options button. So let's now jump into the controls portion of the video, and we'll perhaps have a demonstration at the end of it all. So assuming you follow along with the pre-setup steps, you should have a nice clean slate here with all empty binds. And we'll basically go from top to bottom, in order of importance at least. So to begin with, we want to go up here to full real controls. Obviously we're going to be playing Sim. There's no reason that you can't actually run this in simplified or even realistic, but yeah, I'm going to be running this in full real controls. So the first real thing, what I've incorporated is the touchpad here. I've actually got this running as the mouse joystick. I don't actually fly the plane with this. I use this as a kind of makeshift trimming device. So a lot of the planes, a lot of the German props, especially the early props, the 109s, the Focke-Wulfs, they have no aileron trimming. You can trim it in test flight, but you cannot test it, so you cannot trim it in an actual game. So to get around this, I have this mouse joystick. I'll give you an example of this at the end. But you basically want to set that to controls mode, mouse joystick. And if you then come down here to mouse joystick, you want to make sure this is set to standard. Square the joystick off, and I like to turn all these down, make it as small as possible so it doesn't obscure the view too much. And then I set this cursor screen place to 100%, which basically just puts it in the middle bottom quarter of your screen. I take the rudder off because all I want this to do is the actual elevator and aileron. Like I say, I use it more for the ailerons than the pitch. So 10% is roughly all you need. This is just to keep the plane steady, so 10% aileron is generally all you're going to need. And that will just let you, you can just swipe this left or right. You'll have a dot in the middle to tell you where the center point is, and you can just slide it left or right, and that will allow you to kind of trim the plane either left or to the right. And that is basically all there is to it. Up to you whether you use the mouse joystick. I find it very useful, and I would guess it's probably going to be useful for anybody new getting into sim. Just less to think about, less to actually have to manage. So that's the mouse joystick. And if we go back up to the top here, throttle axis. So I am actually going to put this on the left stick. So left stick up and down. Obviously set your own dead zones. I like to max mine out. Realistic control set to yes, and that is basically all there is to that. You can of course play with the multipliers and stuff like that if you want to, but that is it for me. Hold throttle for war emergency power. I like to have this set to no. Again, just personal preference here. Set this to whatever your personal preference is. Now this is where it gets interesting with the gyro. So, the roll axis, right? The gyro works great for roll. But the problem I found was, so basically let's imagine we're in a game, we're trying to roll left or right. We haven't got enough plane of motion in the roll, because we're actually hitting the desk. And this is the same if you're playing in your lap, you know, the only way around it is to actually raise the controller up, and then you've obviously got the range of motion. But I don't want to be, you know, I want it to be easy. I don't want to be lifting the controller up or anything like that. So what I've actually done is I have the roll on the stick still. Completely up to you, this works either way. Like I said, the gyro works fine, you just haven't got enough range of motion unless you raise the controller, so that's up to you. So I set mine with the stick. I like to put a bit of non-linearity on it, multiplier up, and that is basically it. I will say if you do use the gyro, so just an example here, I'm not going to use this, but if you do want to use the gyro, set your motion sensor to the roll, and you want to put this quite high. I wouldn't go lower than 1.4, but I'd probably leave it at 2 personally, just so you've got that extra range of motion there. I'll probably run nonlinearity at 1 and dead zone at 0. So if you want to run the gyro for the roll, you would have that. In my case, I'm running the left stick because that's what I found works best for me. Again, it's just preference. Use whatever suits your playstyle, but I'm running this here. So 1.5 multiplier, 1.4 nonlinearity. And a very slight dead zone. This controller here is actually, it's got a lot of stick drift, let's just say. So I have to set this at 0.125. Oh, in fact, no, that's wrong. Sorry about that. I actually found the stick drift helps a little bit. So I set the dead zone to none, and I'm able to actually kind of leave that and set it with the dead zone. So it works in my favor. And obviously nonlinearity also helps with that. So 1.5 multiplier, 1.4 nonlinearity. Again, if you want to use the gyro for the roll, completely up to you. I've chose not to. So if we go down to pitch now. So the pitch, I'm going to assign to the motion sensor pitch. This is going to control the elevator here of the plane. You want to put the multiplier all the way up. So again, your plane of motion is basically, you can see at the top there, the green logical axis. That's our plane of motion. So we have full authority. Now the problem is, you probably noticed there, so if I'm trying to pitch down, like I was saying with the roll, I've got somewhat a limited negative pitch. That's as far as I can go without, you know, having to strain it a little bit. So the problem is your wrists only have roughly a 45-degree range of motion. And the same is really said for when you're trying to pitch up. You can't really get the full extent of it until you really pull it up. So the way I've gotten around this is I've actually set a correction value of 9, which basically means the controller is going to be 9 degrees or 9% in that position. And that works quite well for me because I'm not having to pitch up as much and I can just lead targets a bit easier. Dead zone is going to be on 0. And we'll leave the nonlinearity at 1, so we want 1 to 1. I don't think we need inverted. So that should be fine. We'll obviously test this at the end just to make sure. Now the yaw axis, I'm running the 2 back triggers here at the back. So this is the yaw, and it's also going to do the brakes as well, which we'll get into in a second. So we want to set this to L2 and R2. Dead zone is going to be 0 because these actually are quite, at least for my control, these are quite good. There's no dead zone on them. And that is basically it. So you just default settings right there. So sensitivities, these are very important for sim actually. Personally, I run the rule on 75%. You should try and run these as high as possible. Picture is going to be 100%, again, because we have the full motion range of this now. So it's almost like a full joystick. So I have that 100. If you are struggling with sim, probably lower this to 50 or something. Just try and aim to get it to 100%. I will say the only thing these do is they actually delay your movement, so it's not exactly a sensitivity scale, it's more of a delay that it adds to your inputs. So just be careful what you do set these to. And then for the yaw, I recommend 30% because these are not exactly very accurate. I certainly wouldn't run 100% with these here. This is something you'd run actual rudder pedals with, so 30% works just fine for these for me personally. I will say PS5 controllers, I don't actually know if you have any haptic sensitivity yet, but you may be able to get away with raising this just a bit higher because you basically have the motors in these on the PS5 controller, and you can probably sense a bit more of how much you're pressing these. So something worth looking into, I guess. If you are on PS5, just bear that in mind. But I am running 30% there. So, flaps, mechanization. So I'm currently running square for the flaps down and triangle for the flaps up. Now a lot of these binds are going to overbind, they're going to be mixed up with other binds. I've personally not had any issues. If you do have a problem, you can just set your toggle flaps to square and get rid of these two here. I like to have full control of my flaps so I can bring out takeoff and landing flaps whenever I like. But that is just up to you. That's just what I like to do. Toggle air brake, not something I really use, but I understand certain planes will have an air brake and this can be very useful. So I have this set to the 2 back triggers pressed in. Toggle gear is actually going to be triangle plus the 2 triggers again. Just bear in mind, if you do have a heavy plane, something that needs to take off with takeoff flaps deployed, this here is going to actually raise your flaps again. So you're going to kind of have to have your flaps out when you take off, bring the gear in, and then quickly press square to bring the flaps out again. Otherwise, obviously, you're going to end up dropping. So be careful with that one. The brakes. So again, we're going to have L2. Dead zone is going to be 0. Same for the right brake. Dead zone 0. Oh, that one's not done quite right. So just make sure it says R2. In fact, probably better just to come up here and set it yourself. So L2 and R2 for brakes. All my guns are going to be on R1. You can set individual buttons for these if you choose to do, but again, I'm just choosing to have them all on the same button. Secondary weapons is actually going to be on the X button. So as I had in the pre-setup, I'm actually using the secondary weapons bind. And this will actually allow us to fire not only bombs, but rockets as well here. So it's a very useful bind to use. And then we have switch secondary weapons. That there is going to be on triangle plus X. So if you want to switch from bombs to rockets, let's say we have a plane loaded with both bombs and rockets, you can switch between these, and then you would obviously just press X to fire or drop the bomb. So countermeasures, generally a jet thing. Not something I really play with. But you've got plenty of buttons here, so just customize this as you choose to. This is just a basis, like I said. You should only be using this video as a template to base your own controls off. Just some ideas for you guys. But I'm not going to set any of this because I don't particularly fly jets. Reload guns we don't actually need, but if you do want to play, say, arcade or something like that, yeah, obviously you've got the choice of setting that here. Gunners, I must admit, not something I've set up, but I would probably end up setting that on the right stick, I guess. So let's just set that now. I haven't tested this, so we will see. Cockpit view is going to be on my circle button. External view, just really useful on the runway. And no, that is the same as my flaps up. Again, I haven't really looked into bombers too much yet. Probably something you can fit in. There's plenty of buttons free. I'm trying to think what you'd have that on. Yeah, I'll have to come back to bombers again. I can't really think where I'd put that at the moment. I'm sure there'll be a way around it. But we'll just leave that for now. Alright, zoom axis. This is where it kind of gets interesting. So, what have I got set for this? I'll have to play around with this in test flight after at the end, but I think I'm running something like this. So I've got a minus 40% correction, which basically means it's going to pull the zoom all the way back so we can have a larger field of view, kind of see targets easier. So you're almost going to be sat back in your seat rather than at the windscreen. This is going to actually, this correction value here, negative 40, is going to pull your head back. And then we want reset axis on L1. So typically how I fly is whenever I'm coming in contact with somebody, I'm about to shoot them, I'll press L1, hold that down, and that will kind of bring my head back into the window, slightly forwards, and then I'll fire with R1, so I'll constantly be holding L1 when they're in that front window pane near the pipper. I think that is it. I do have something on yeah, we'll have to test this in test flight. I can't quite remember everything. So for the view, I'm actually using the view in battle here. And this is all going to be on the right stick. Bit of dead zone. And we'll also put a bit of non-linearity here. Relative control is going to be set to yes. I'm also going to put the multiplier up. And then we're going to reset this with both L1. So again, whenever I'm coming into contact, I'll press L1. And I'm also going to put this to L3, so the left stick clicks in, which we will explain shortly. In fact, we'll explain it now. So L3 is actually going to be my look back. So click that in to look directly behind you. And then for the view in battle y-axis, we want this up to on the left stick, up and down. 1.4 non-linearity, relative control set to yes, and 1.4 multiplier. Oh, wrong stick. And we also need to set the reset. So L1, again, L1 to aim, and then also L3. So whenever we look behind, we want that to reset the camera. Head movement forwards and backwards. I'm going to run another negative correction here. We'll put it at -25. And actually, let's make that 30. We don't need a dead zone. And movement forward and backwards. Relative, yes. Increase value is going to be on L1. So whenever we hold L1 to target, that's actually going to pull our head forwards in the cockpit. And I believe that is it for the... Oh, actually no. So forwards and backwards, I believe we want that on L3 as well. So when we actually look behind us, we want our head to look behind as well, or move behind. Right, so for the head movement up and down, I'm actually using the D-pad here for up and down and left and right. You don't have to set this, I just find this quite convenient to be able to look past the window panes and all the steel framing. So I've got the max value for looking up, set to up, and the minimum value is going to be down. And again, we also want the max value set to the left stick click, so when we look behind, our head is raised in the cockpit. And that is basically it for that. So left and right, same thing again. So we want max value is going to be right, and minimum value is going to be left. And then same thing again, so we look... Every plane differs with this, but for the German planes in general, you want to be moving your head to the left when you look behind. Smoke is going to be on our touchpad plus D-pad down. Open cockpit. So very useful for the P-47 and generally American planes. You can open the cockpit and actually listen around for sounds. It's kind of bugged actually, but you know, you got to make use of what you're given. So that there can be very handy. If you can't see them, you can at least hear them. Event selection menu, we are not going to bother with any of that, although the radio menu, so this is where it gets interesting. Obviously we're using our left stick here for the throttle and roll, and the issue is when you bring up your map, so I'm going to be using circle to bring up the map here, and when you bring this up, you're able to move the cursor with the left stick, but that also directly affects the throttle and the roll. So in order for this not to interfere with the throttle and roll, you want to set an enable axis, so obviously we want to use circle. Set this to the left stick left and right, and that will basically prevent the left stick from being read for anything else because it's actually enabled for this. Same thing with the y-axis. And enable it with circle. So again, we're not actually using the radio menu. This is purely just to prevent the left stick from interfering with any other axes while we bring up the map. And that is all those two are doing. Control aim acceleration, we're not actually using any mouse aim, so we can safely ignore this. Mouse joystick we've already been over. Trimmer's fixation, so my triangle button is actually going to be the shift key for enabling the trim on the D-pad. We're going to save the trim in test flight with trimmer's fixation, and that is going to be triangle plus the left stick clicked in. Elevator trim is going to be again on the D-pad up and down, so we're going to enable this with triangle. And bear in mind this is inverted, so when I fly inverted. In fact, I think I do need to go back to the pitch axis and invert that. We'll get to that in test flight. So I like to set this to D-pad down. And minimum value is going to be D-pad up, again, because that is inverted. Keep value for disabled axis should be set to yes. Relative control is also going to be yes. 1% for the steps. And we will also bring this multiply down to 0.5. Same thing for the ailerons, pretty much. So enable with triangle. Keep value for disabled axis set to yes. Max value is going to be D-pad right. And min value is going to be D-pad left. Relative control set to yes. Multiplier 0.5. Oh, and you also want 1% increments for the relative control step. Rudder trim is going to be on enable axis triangle. And we're actually going to set this to the triggers at the back again. So L2 and R2. Dead zone 0. Relative control yes. And we'll bring this down again. Alright, manual engine control. So I have this all on my pause button, as I was saying earlier. This, where I cleared everything earlier, this allows me to bind the pause button here. So engine controls mode is going to be pause or options plus circle. Toggle engine is going to be pause plus the left stick clicked in. Pitch, or propeller pitch even, is going to be on the left stick up and down. We're going to enable this with the options button. Give it a bit of dead zone. Probably add a bit of non-linearity in there as well. And set this to relative 1%. Yeah, we'll probably lower this actually. Actually, no, we'll leave it at 100. What we'll do is we'll lower this one here because we are actually using an axis. So about 50%. You can lower this if you choose to do so, but we'll try with 50%. And then for the prop pitch, you're going to actually want to set this to pause plus square. So you've got engine controls mode on pause plus circle, and you can toggle the prop pitch with options plus square, and then you simply hold pause and move the stick up and down while you're in flight, and that can control your prop pitch, so you can glide back to base and whatnot. Radiator, just for sakes of making this complete. Again, not something I really use, but that's going to be on the options button again. Also, make sure you have keep value for disabled set to yes. I think we missed that on the other one. And again, relative control, just lower it a touch. Set prop pitch to keep value for disabled axis. And again, you're going to need the toggle for the radiator, so we'll use pause and X, let's say. And the neat thing about this is here, so we have, so far we have everything for mech manual engine controls on the pause button here. You could actually set the gearing, you know, the magneto positions, the superchargers. You could set all this on the D-pad. You've got all these buttons here to use. So if you choose to do so, you can also take this a step further and set up the gearing and the superchargers. But that is basically it for the controls for the flight side. We just need to go into common here and just set a final few bindings. So obviously map, as I was saying, I'm using circle. Statistics is going to be on the touchpad click. Multifunction menu, just for the sake of getting the warning away that pops up, you know, blah blah blah, you haven't set a binding for multifunction menu. I'm going to put this on triangle plus square, circle and X. Chat. So I use a keyboard. Always handy to have a keyboard when you need to talk to somebody in the team or on the other side. Just control enter and enter for chat. And also switch chat mode is going to be tab. And that's basically it for the keyboard side. Reset motion sensor. I don't think this actually has an effect because we're using the align motion sensor with gravity option, but just in case, I've got this set to the touchpad. What happened there? Okay, that must be another bug with the game. So yeah, they've had a few updates and there's a few issues going around at the moment. Well, we can set this to wherever, so let's just set it to pause, I guess. It's not particularly important. Set target for squad does have its uses, I must admit. So this will put a yellow arrow wherever you're shooting or aiming. It only works when you're close to the ground, but it can be useful if you're running in a squad. So obviously, again, I'm aiming with L1. That's going to move my head forward. So whenever I do that, it's going to place a marker for my squad mates. Also when I fire, and also when I zoom in. So the right stick click, by the way, is going to be the zoom, which we'll get to in a second. Obviously, we need to use the pause menu for the mech manual engine controls. So we're going to use the menu or the pause screen on triangle plus pause. Alright, zoom camera. So again, right stick click. Use touchpad for aiming. This does need to be set to yes because I'm using the mouse joystick for the trimming. And we'll set this to 5%. Controller aim is going to be 100%. And I like to run 0% smoothness, 100% in zoom. And then for quick radio messages, I am running, so typically the ones you want here is going to be follow me, which generally in sim is going to be used to call out positions. Let's say you see a dot in the distance and you want to know if it's friendly, you'll call this out and generally everybody that's nearby will respond and let you know whether it's friendly. So I have this on up plus circle. And the other common one is obviously going to be cover me. So if you have somebody on your 6, you need help, just call this out and generally people will come and help you out. And I have this on D-pad down plus circle. Some other ones you might want to set. So generally affirmative, negative, and obviously these are going to be on. So D-pad right plus circle for affirmative and D-pad left plus circle for negative. You can go crazy with this. You can set more. You know, you can have returning to base. You can have a thank you for whenever someone saved you when you've asked for cover. You know, well done to congratulate somebody. And what else do I run? That might be it. So we have follow me, cover me, return to base, well done. Obviously we've got affirmative and negative. Oh, and sorry as well. Yeah, I like to run sorry, so if somebody asks for backup and I couldn't save them, I might just say sorry. So I'd have these on. So touchpad plus up. Oh, actually, no. Yeah, just examples. I have been running these, but I've just changed these binds here to have the smoke and the open cockpit, so I'll leave them unbound. But again, just examples of what you can do. I will say another thing as well. If you don't use the mouse joystick, if for some reason you don't like using a touchpad for the mouse joystick, another thing you can do here is you can actually set these to flicks. So you've got 4 directions, and you can actually use these here for commands. Something I found them to be particularly useful for. And that should really be it. So if we just go into a quick test flight, I'm sure there's going to be some bugs. I'll just give you a kind of demonstration of how this is going to work. So test flight simulator. So we've got camera on the right stick, which seems to be working fine. We have zoom on the right stick click. Pedals seem to be working fine, the yaw, rudder left and right. And we have our pitch, which also seems to be working fine. Obviously we haven't set the roll on the gyro, so we have roll here on the left stick. And we have look back, which is actually working fine, surprisingly. And you can't look around when you do that because you're locked in position, unfortunately. But generally all you want to do is be able to look around anyway, look behind you. So we have circle for the map. Touchpad would bring up the scoreboard, but we're in test flight, so that doesn't work. We have mech, all working fine. Obviously you need to enable prop pitch, and that should be fine. So 0% would be gliding, and 100% would be to slow you down. You can also see the radiator is working there, so you can toggle that on and off if you had a radio control. And then to toggle mech off again, it's just pause plus circle. So we have triangle on the external view, and I can see a problem right away there. We have forgot to... Where is it? So just make sure you have keep value for disabled axis set to yes. And just double check all those. And then again, if we come back here, triangle is our trim. So as you can see, I'm setting that with the triangle and D-pad. Select go and that saves. And then I've also got the ailerons. So if you want to trim the ailerons to the right and to the left. And say if you wanted to actually save this, you would press triangle plus the left stick in, and that would save that for the next time you fly out. We have a bit of trim going on here for some reason. In fact, that seems a bit quick. We'll just lower that a bit. So, trimming. We'll pull that back up to 1 and we'll lower the sensitivity instead. And I think that should work fine. Yeah. Still a bit quick. Obviously, you can adjust that. So, circle to go back to cockpit view, by the way. Flaps is going to be on square, so we can go from combat to takeoff and landing, and all the way back to raised. Next is going to be your rockets or bombs. Obviously, we don't have any rockets or bombs on this plane here. What else? Oh, head movement is on the left D-pad, so you've got up, down, left, and right. Like I said before, this is quite useful for looking past the steel bars in your aircraft. L1 should... Yeah, it's kind of working. So, as I was saying earlier, we have L1 set to our zoom. That's going to reset your zoom. And that is going to just put your head slightly forward in the cockpit. And then the negative correction slowly brings your head back. So that's working fine. Runs are on R1. What else? What else? Oh, there is one other thing I've missed out, actually. So this can be quite useful as well, particularly if you're new to sim. So if you go down to camera control, head movement up and down, what you can actually do is you can set the head movement up and down to the gyro. So when you're pitching up with the plane, your head is actually moving inside as well. So you would set this to... roughly about 1.4. You may need to tweak this slightly. 0 dead zone. And if we just back out of here, you can kind of see the effects. So if we go back to cockpit view, you can actually see as I move the gyro, we move around in the cockpit as well. Right, so we seem to have all the controls working fine. We have reset on the L1 button there. Chat commands won't work because we're in test flight, of course. Alright, let's try and take off. So, as I was saying before with the mouse joystick, I like to use this as a kind of makeshift trim device. So I know the Focke-Wulf here is going to pull to the right when I try and take off. So I've got the trim there set all the way to the right. I'm going to throttle up, apply some right rudder and right brake. You can look over the nose there if you want to. And I don't usually play on a table, so it's going to be quite awkward. But basically you want to tilt the gyro forward just to keep your wheels on the ground while you get some speed. And then once you get to about 240 generally, you want to pull up. Bring your gear in with triangle plus L2 and R2. And you're away. It's that simple. Build up some speed, you can reset your trim, and you then fly in the plane with the gyro and the roll on the left stick. It's that simple. Just double check everything's working. So you can basically set your trim there to level out your flight path. I'm playing on a table here, so I just wanted to apply some negative elevator. You can look behind again, or you can just click the stick in like so. So you've seen a target, you want to just look in the front pane there, and you pull in lead. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, it's going to take some time to initially get used to it, but I feel it's a lot easier to use than, say, learning to control the plane on these little tiny sticks. Even if you say so obviously you can pop these things on here to give you a bit more range with these, but even with that, the gyro is just in a league of its own. It's miles ahead. I've been playing a couple of weeks on and off with the gyro, and I've been coming in the top 3 on the scoreboard, sometimes first. Sometimes I've actually had 12 kills with no deaths. And I'm still kind of a newish player to Sim. I mean, I've played on and off over the years, but I've never really spent any time in there extensively. So already I've started to pick up on things, and yeah, the gyro has been really good. So I highly recommend you guys give this a try, and I would love to hear your feedback in the comments, how you get on, and what your general thoughts are on it. So that is it, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video, hope this helps, and I will see you in the next video.